Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Welcome to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we are going to be talking about the 2024 freshman class, or rather the 2027 draft class. We're getting into the depths here. We're getting deep, and but that's what we love to do here on this pod. I'm honestly like, a lot of these players are going to matter when it's all said and done. And this is the first year I've ever actually had any kind of knowledge of the freshmen, so it's exciting for me to be able to sit here and talk about them and go back and forth with Aaron, because in the past it's been a lot of Aaron carrying me on his back, and I'm sure for a while there, his back was feeling a little sore. How are you doing, buddy?
Well, I'm doing well, and glad to have you aboard as far as the freshman analysis. And no, I mean, it is a fun class. I'm excited to get into it, and I know some out there are not as optimistic as others about the class, but ultimately there are some talented guys we need to discuss here. And like you said, there are plenty of guys who will make an impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, from a lot of people, especially from the C2C boys, they're not as high on this freshman class, and so maybe it was the wrong year to get into it. Who knows? But I've done a lot of research on it now, and I'm trying to utilize that research and see if it works. I think it does, and I guess we'll find out. Maybe we'll find out tonight. We'll see how much me and Aaron agree or disagree. I know we agree a little bit. We talked about the freshmen actually. Aaron had brought it up, saying, "Hey, let's talk about the freshmen again." I'm like, it's probably been too soon. It probably wasn't that long ago we talked about them. Went back and looked. I think it was like, what did I say, October or something like that. The last time that we talked about it was something like pretty long time ago. So I was like, oh, I guess it has not been that recently. So we can definitely dive into these freshmen. A lot has changed. A lot has happened. And honestly, it wasn't just me and you. We had some other people on. We did kind of a freshman mock draft and everything. So this might be little more like in depth, or at least more about how we feel about the class. Not that we didn't appreciate everyone's opinion and all that kind of good stuff. But now, like I said, you've been doing this longer than I have as far as the freshman recruits and for C2C in general, but definitely focusing on freshmen. You have a lot more experience with that. What exactly are you looking for when you're evaluating? I guess I already know this, but are you going and finding the high school tape? Are you, what are you doing? Are you looking up high school stats? Because I know those aren't always the easiest thing to find. What exactly are you looking for to figure out the freshmen that you want to draft and how you're going to rank them and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a combination of different things that go into that ranking. So I don't solely rely just on, say, for example, the recruit ranking or the star status, but that does make a difference at the end of the day. Are these guys big time recruits? Were a bunch of schools after them? So I look at the offer list. That makes a little bit of an impact for sure. Definitely the measurables. So if you have some of the time scores from track, some of the on the field speed, some of the production metrics, even some of those things can be found at campus2canton.com, and I have access to some databases there. Some of it I just have to look up my own. Honestly, just looking at the track times, looking at what the 247 or the on 3 pages say as far as their athleticism goes. It can be a little bit spotty out there. We know going back, like Saquon Barkley was not very fast in high school, and look at him, like he was super athletic, super explosive running back. So these guys can transform, that's for sure. That's why if you can get multiple measures, both timed track times, for example, and on the field speed to confirm that a guy is fast or maybe not so fast, that can be useful. But it's more than that. I mean, it's the size, it's the height. Is this guy going to be able to develop that frame? It's the landing spot. I know early in the process, sometimes you have to take that with a grain of salt because these guys can flip like nothing, especially with today's NIL and other reasons for kids to flip, but I think landing spot has to matter. At the end of the day, I know folks focus should be on the talent, right? We always preach that in Devy and just in any sort of analysis really of players. But at the end of the day, I mean, if a guy who we really like goes to Rutgers, it's like, yeah, that takes a little bit of the shine off of him compared to a guy going to Alabama or Ohio State, or whatever the case is. So you asked a little bit about, is it more of a film based versus analytical based analysis? And I have to say, I mean, I rely more on the film for sure with these freshman players, because sometimes the statistics that are out there are inaccurate. They don't give the full senior or junior seasons. There's not a lot of context always. Sometimes you're able to see, and again, C2C has some database things where they're able to tell you maybe some of the shares and whatnot of their offense. But in a lot of cases, we're just saying, well, the guy hit 1,000 receiving yards in high school. Maybe he's pretty good, just based on those raw numbers, but we don't know if that's a huge passing system or what. So that can lead you astray a little bit more. You can definitely, fall for some false promising production, I guess, if you're only relying on stats. That's for sure for these incoming guys. So definitely there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I personally watch film. I know you're not the biggest film guy there, John, and I know that you've come up with a process now that doesn't necessarily, you're not relying necessarily on the film, which is kind of nice. Probably saves you some time as well with that process, I'm sure.
Yeah, it definitely does save time, and that was kind of the point. Was and nothing against you or anyone that puts in the time or the effort, but I just, especially with the hit rates, the research that I've done, the hit rates being so poor in college, do we even want to spend that much time, trying to figure out who the best players are and all that kind of stuff? Because, even if you say you're the absolute best at this, so maybe you can hit it like a 40% rate or something like that, because, like a decent player is probably hitting it like a 20% rate. And, like a bad player is probably hitting it a 10% rate, or, whatever you want to call it. But if you're hitting at a 40 to even a 50% rate, I mean, that's still a lot of work to put into to possibly hit at a 50% rate. And that's just like, man, can we do this research? Can we figure out a way to just make it more simple and, and take away some of the necessity to find these stats? Because I will say, the first thing I ever did when I first started, when I first created Devy Beth, was I said, I'm going to figure out the best way, like to figure out who the best recruits are. And like these unproven players, even if they weren't necessarily like a true freshman, these unproven players that hadn't gotten on the field yet, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at their freshman stats. And I'm sorry, their high school stats. And I'm going to figure out who the best quarterbacks are, best running backs, so on and so forth. Well, you can't find it for like probably 25% of the players. You just can't find it. Or if you do, you find like one season, and it might not even be a full season. It might not be accurate. It might say, oh, they have 1,400 yards. And you're like, well, no, this site says they have 2,700 yards, or, something to that effect. So that's a pain, obviously. But even if you do get it, there's really no, well, I don't want to say there's no way of knowing, but there's so many different levels of high school ball that, like, unless you really pay attention to it and like really figure out which schools are in what districts and yada, 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 you can't even say that 4,000 yards in this district is the same as 4,000 yards in this district. And I don't want to spend that much time trying to figure all that kind of stuff out. And that's why I said, you know what, this is a bad idea. It doesn't work, and so I scratched that. That's why I wanted to get away from the stats. And I'm not a film grinder, so I didn't want to go and try to start being one or anything like that. That's why I went through, did the research, and I figured out, you know what, a lot of it has to do with the school. As much as we want to sit here and say, oh man, this player's going to be the best because I watched them, or they had 5,000 yards, or whatever it might be, we could almost just as easily say, this player went to Alabama. This player went to Texas Tech, These are not the same thing, and it's almost as simple to just do that, and that's kind of where I based my my research on, and that's what I based FreshBeth on. And so I'm not saying that it's right. I'm saying that the research I've done has shown that it has a pretty good hit rate by doing it this way. And so by more focusing on the schools and less necessarily on the players, even though the players obviously still matter. And I that's what I'm really trying to fine tune right now, is like how much I want to focus on the player, uh, the recruit score, the recruit rank, and all that kind of stuff. I've really found like even each position's a little different. Where wide receiver, it seems to matter a little more. The recruit rank, the 24/7 score, or the composite score, seems to matter more. You really do have some higher hit rates with your wide receivers that have that like 0.995 recruit rank. With your running backs, it's almost the opposite. It doesn't really matter per se what their recruit rank is, what their composite score is, or anything like that. It matters more where they go, who are they behind, like things like that. And so that's what I'm really trying to fine tune, and that's what I've tried to do throughout the past few months, creating FreshBeth and doing all that. So that's what we'll get into tonight. But that was a little bit about our process, and the obviously it's two completely different processes, and yet we've actually once again we've talked about these freshmen before, and we've come to agree on a lot of these players, and so I guess it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is a good thing. And I think at the end of the day, while it's maybe a different way of coming up with, or the pathway, however we solve that equation, right, to get to, okay, which players do we want to draft and invest in and rank highly, different ways of doing it, but we come to the same conclusion. So that means I'm sure that though we're using different formulas, some of the same inputs are in there, as far as, and mine's not necessarily a formula, right? I'm not creating a model, but I'm definitely prioritizing some of the things that you said, the school, the landing spot, sometimes the depth chart ahead. That's some additional context that maybe I will apply to the ranks, things to just kind of tweak these guys a bit here or there. But, like you said, there are ways to do it without necessarily having to spend a ton of time on these recruits. So again, if you want to get that little extra edge, I like to think that I have sometimes a little extra one because of the extra research and film analysis that I've been able to put in on top of that. But there's still really good ways to kind of rank out this class and discover which guys have a really good shot of hitting. Because at the end of the day, nobody's guaranteed to hit, right? We know that there's tons of talented guys coming in at every position, and not all of them are going to hit. In fact, hit rates show that it's just dicey, even amongst 5-star guys. So, better hit rates amongst those top guys who are the 5-star and high 4-star recruits. But at the end of the day, we know injuries happen. We know suspensions and off the field and academic issues can be a problem. Depth chart, coaching staffs, or poor scheme fits. There's a lot of things that come up. So I'm excited to get into these guys today to see who we think is going to be a good fit, have some opportunity, and has the talent to ultimately translate to the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we should probably start with the quarterbacks. It's obviously the most exciting position for everyone, assuming, everyone's in super flex leagues and all that kind of stuff, when we're going to have everyone want to focus on the quarterbacks. And generally speaking, if you're doing a supplemental or even a startup or whatever, you're going to see a lot of those quarterbacks go early and often. And yet this year, there's really only a couple of guys, and I think maybe people are starting to come around. It could be a combination of the two things. Like, the class isn't necessarily as good as maybe some previous classes, but also I think that people are starting to understand that these hit rates aren't as good as maybe we used to think they were. Or I don't know. Once again, I'm fairly new to the C2C game, so I don't know exactly how people felt in the past. But I know when I first started paying attention to C2C, it just seemed like you take quarterback no matter what, and it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care if I hit or not or whatever. I'm just going to take a quarterback because it's the cheapest you're ever going to get them. Like, yeah, you're also wasting a pick a lot of the time. So, both things can be true. It could be the cheapest you ever get them. Although I think that's kind of false because, we look at supplementals or startups now, where you're getting a guy like a Jackson Dart, later on. You're getting a guy like a Connor Wegman. Like we just had our startup, and I got Connor Wegman, you got Jackson Dart, like 2 picks, back to back, basically in the second round. That's cheaper than they probably would have been, as 5-star prospects, and yada yada yada. So like you can't even say it's the cheapest you're ever going to get, because all they have to do is falter a little bit, and then you can go get them cheaper after that. Now you're going to have your Caleb Williams, and there's going to be other your Trevor Lawrence, somebody that takes over as a true freshman, or shortly thereafter. Yes, that would have been the cheapest you're ever going to get him. You're not going to get that guy for cheap after that, of course. But then, we also see they go into the NFL. Oh, at least with Trevor Lawrence, maybe they're not quite the hero that everyone thought they were going to be, and so you can't even say just because they did that as a true freshman that guarantees they're going to be an NFL stud or they're going to be a savior on the NFL side either. So
yeah, I use the example of like Bryce Young versus DJU going in the top 4 guy a couple years back in drafts, like top 4 overall spots in a startup draft. So you could go those 2 quarterbacks. There's a couple other options there. And obviously one of them has kind of panned out, but we can't even say Bryce Young's truly panned out. Like, I mean, based on that freshman season, very mixed results. We'll see if he can turn it around. He certainly has a lot of talent, but DJU, just opposite side. I mean, you had to draft him with a top 4 overall pick in startups, and look at how that's factored in. So a guy who has not really proven it, whether you drafted him as a true freshman or going into that second season, it was, it's a risky proposition.
Yeah, and this isn't meant to scare people away or say don't ever draft a quarterback. But, I think, like I said, I think people are coming around a little bit to maybe you don't need a force quarterback. And you really do need to focus on, once again, the landing spots, the recruit pedigree, things like that. So that brings us to this year, and I really think, at least for Fresh Beth, we have two guys at the top, and that's it. Last year, I think there was there was more. I want to say, actually, I can bring it up real quick. Last year, there was actually only 2 guys at the top for Fresh Beth last year as well. So, although one of them was much higher, and that was Jackson Arnold, was actually graded out the best for Fresh Beth. But then Malachi Nelson was also up there, and I would say that one's already not working out. But that's for most people. That's not just for Fresh Beth. So 2 last year, 2 this year. Is that what you have in your top tier as well, or do you have something different there?
Yeah, I have 2 guys at the very top in this class. I was considering for a while, having another guy there. I don't know if you were, but certainly, yeah, now it's settled into clear top 2, and that's the case in a lot of drafts. It's pretty consensus at this point in this quarterback class, and I can go ahead and reveal those 2. I mean, that's Dylan Raiola, quarterback going to Nebraska, and DJ Legway, who's at Florida. So those are just the top 2 guys who have the size, have the arm talent, and I mean, Legway is more mobile, that's for sure, than Raiola, but both of them have very intriguing skill sets, very high-end recruits that project to be NFL caliber guys if they can put it together and just have a consistent game to them. So I think those are the 2 clear tier 1 guys, I guess, in this class, and certainly both of them viable 101s in freshman only drafts.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because for the longest time, it seemed like Raiola was kind of the clear-cut number 1. Nobody was touching him, and I guess that was when he was still going to Georgia, right? And then he transfers over to Nebraska, and whether it was a combination of the 2 things or just with the transfer and people started noticing DJ Lagway more, or I don't know exactly what it was, but all of a sudden people started saying, this DJ Lagway guy's not too shabby, and started moving him up, and all of a sudden you started hearing his name more and more, to the point where we have people like, I think it's Corey Pereira, on our pod last time when we did the freshman mock draft. He took DJ Lagway as the QB1, and I don't think it was that early on. It was like probably the 4th pick or 5th pick in the draft. So I mean, he was fine, but yeah, he was able to get him, but he really wanted nothing to do with Raiola. He was all about Lagway, and I'm starting to see more and more people feel that way. Are you kind of going along with that, or are you still all on Team Raiola there?
I do think that there's a little bit more stability when you look at the Nebraska situation. And it's kind of funny because you don't necessarily think of Nebraska in recent years for being like a powerhouse or putting out great QB recruits or production and all those things. But I do think with Matt Rule there will be some stability. They're actually building a pretty nice receiving core there. And I mean, Raiola, I just think he's such a high end passer that even though he has kind of that subpar rushing production, he's not a zero there as far as mobility goes. I mean, he certainly is a functional NFL, or at least functional for what the NFL needs nowadays for guys who can at least get outside the pocket, can move around within the pocket. And I just love the arm talent there. So I still am comfortable with having Raiola as one, but I mean, there's not much separating them because of DJ Lagway's just raw skills. It's just raw skills going to Florida under Billy Napier, who's probably not going to survive past this season. It's like you're just opening yourself to a lot of risk there that this guy just kind of gets ruined, has really poor production. Maybe he gets put in for a couple of games, but then he gets pulled this season. I mean, there are some weapons there at Florida, but I'm not necessarily thinking he's going to have a monster start to his career, a super efficient start to his career. But I will say, I mean, his senior season was just amazing. I mean, honestly, from a rushing standpoint, from a passing standpoint, I believe I heard some Devy podcast mention like it's a top 5 high school quarterback season of all time. I mean, it's that great as far as just a statistical analysis goes of it. And I get why people are excited with the arm talent and the mobility. So I like a lot of things about DJ Lagway. Maybe just hearing me say those things will have folks even more, I guess, anxious to get him as the quarterback one in this class, which again, I understand completely. I think that with Lagway, there is potential for him to transfer out after the season. And with today's college football landscape, I mean, he could land somewhere really, really favorable. He could go to Alabama and go with Kalen DeBoer, who I think that would be lethal. And there's just a lot of different options out there. I'm not saying that's necessarily my number one prediction, but it could happen very easily in today's game.
Yeah, I guess that's the only concern is just the unknown because I really don't think he's going to play this year. I'm not saying Graham Mertz is some amazing quarterback or anything. I don't think anyone believes that, but I think that he's good enough to, and he's a veteran. He's enough of a veteran that, Napier's not going to like just switch to him unless they're just that bad. And even then, is Lagway ready? To the point where they're going to say, oh, well, now we can win because of Lagway. I don't even know if that's going to be the case either. So I really don't see a scenario or too many scenarios where Lagway starts a bunch of games. And so it just makes me think, like you said, what if he transfers out now? He's to learn a whole new system, and it could be good for him. But you're kind of starting over again, and the more these guys transfer, the more risk is involved. Even though it could be a good thing, there's risk and reward and all that. But it's just I'd say there's obviously a lot more stability, like you said earlier with Raiola. Is stability a good thing? Yes, but is the upside there with Raiola, I guess is the question. Honestly, my answer is I kind of want neither at their price. And so it's not that I don't it's not that I don't like them, but they're falling into a scenario or category where they hit at about 25% rate where they are in fresh path. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking for better hit rates in the early first round of a supplemental draft or a startup, whenever they go. I'm looking for better hit rates than a 25% shot. And so, when you factor in the supporting cast in Nebraska, when you factor in the unknowns with Florida and with Lagway and everything, I just kind of go, man, you're telling me there's a 25% chance they're going to hit and there's a bunch of unknowns? Yeah, give me some of these wide receivers, give me some of these, running backs, or, if we're talking about a supplemental draft, give me some of these proven players that have already done it in college over these freshmen. So, this is one of those situations where I'm saying, yes, I like these quarterbacks. If I could get them at a decent price, I would definitely take them. I don't really like where they're going, fairly early in the drafts, and so I'm willing to bypass it. And our buddy Drew's in the chat, and he says, "Graham, dink no dunk Mertz." He definitely is a dink and or dunk kind of guy, but I guess it worked for him last year. They actually had a pretty solid year. So that brings us to, I guess, the next tier of quarterbacks here. I had a couple of guys, and I don't know, actually going to the same school. So I don't know if that ended up being the same for you, but I had Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland together here. And, Aaron Noland is definitely a worse prospect as far as, as a recruit and everything, but and so that's going to end up hurting them. But it's, they're both going to Ohio State. They both have an opportunity. I think the consensus here is saying that Aaron Nolan's going to transfer out or have to do something because there's no way he's beating out Julian Sayin, which I would definitely agree with. So, I have him lower, but I have him here in the same tier because, they're both going to a great school. They both have opportunity. And we've seen the lesser players, the lesser recruits, whatever, beat out some of these other players at Ohio State. It's not always the high end guy that wins out. So as much as everyone wants to say, "Oh, Aaron Nolan's gonna have to get the hell out of here," and he very well may, but we can't guarantee it. And so I still want to have him up here in the same tier. But I'll tell you what, this tier does not have a good hit rate, and so I'm saying I have him in the same tier. It's not saying much. I don't really want much to do with them.
And that's fair. I get the uncertainty with it. I think the nice part about the Aaron Noland selection, if you are targeting him later in your drafts, is the fact that he's so cheap now. Ohio State quarterback who has some of the tools that he does, who was even a 5-star, I believe, at one point for Rivals, and just a top 6 guy amongst all the recruiting services before some of this fallout most recently. Aaron Noland is a very interesting player. And at the end of the day, I didn't think that he was the most amazing guy out there. Like, solid enough production, though. His rushing was okay. It's nothing to necessarily rave about. I thought he would throw more of a loopy pass versus just having this insane arm talent. So I think there's flaws that you can certainly poke in his profile. And at being 6'2" in the 190s, yeah, it's fine size. I'm not necessarily concerned about that. So there is a chance that he ultimately wins out at Ohio State, but it might take a while for him to actually, claim that spot there. And I think the same could be said for Julian Sayin. And I think folks will assume that, he's the higher rated guy in their recruiting services. He's a 5-star amongst every recruiting service. He's going to be the next guy there, but we sometimes don't see that pan out. And he has his own flaws. He's not really a rushing threat. He's a guy who, again, has maybe enough mobility to his game, but he's a little bit undersized compared to Raiola as well. So, the guy is, 6'1", 200, soaking wet kind of thing. And he's just a very skilled passer. I think he has that going for him. I do like guys who are coming into college just very, very refined and just have a lot of ability as a passer, and they have a great view of the game. They have a great processing of the game. So I do think he has got those things going for him. But then after that, some of the athletic tools are limited. And do I really want to have to wait? Because I don't really see him starting this season. So it's just was saying he's too expensive. I've found myself looking at him in startups and supplementals and not wanting to pull the trigger. Ultimately, it's the price. In supplemental draft, I'm not drafting him in the first. In a startup draft, I'm not touching him in those early rounds. That's for sure. I found myself saying, gosh, if he's almost a first-round supplemental guy, why is he falling so late in drafts? And it's just nobody wants to take a chance on a quarterback like that early in a startup draft. So I think, yeah, he's a kind of an overpriced guy. I could see pivoting to Aaron Noland at Ohio State for sure.
Yeah, and just the fact that he's not even really being mentioned in the mix, beating out Will Howard, Devin Brown, just scares the crap out of me anyway. Even taking away anything about him as a recruit, him as a player, just it just Will Howard is not good at football. Devin Brown is not good at football, and yet they, if he's not even really in the mix, I get that that's generally not going to be a thing, especially for a team that's talking about a national championship and all that, like the true freshman coming in and starting from day one. I completely understand that, but just the fact that he's not even really being like discussed in the mix just makes me think that he's just not that close to being ready, and that makes me think, yeah, there's no way I'm drafting him where he's been going in drafts. And once again, it's not me disliking the player, it's not me disliking the recruit or anything like that, but just man, these quarterbacks get pushed up, and I just don't want to take them.
I get it, and I've been hearing some, I guess, negative reviews even with his arm strength. I mean, at camp, like he's just not pushing the ball down with the velocity or the power that you want to see. So that's a concern, right off the bat. And I guess I'm not concerned as much about, not beating out these more experienced guys, especially a guy with as much starting experience as Will Howard. But who, say what you want about his NFL upside, I think Will Howard's gonna offer a lot of starting experience there, at least as something that Ohio State's going to have to lean on because as being a contender. So no, with Sayan or Air Noland, I'm not really expecting them to necessarily be a big factor this year. That's for sure. But as far as other freshmen, I'm kind of curious who you have next or who you have your eyes on, if there's anybody else that's popping for you.
Not really. I mean, there's another tier break after those two guys, and then it's guys. Honest, like I know who the consensus love, and I know that Fresh Beth does not love them. So I can just tell you right there that like Walker White is a big name for people. Luke Cromenhook is a big name for people. Those guys fall into a tier with an 11.11% hit rate, in Fresh Bet. It's just saying, the chances are not great. So, I'm not going to go out of my way to draft those guys, and they tend to go higher than where I'd want to take them. I know you were, fairly high, at least at one point, on Damon Williams, and he's actually right after, he's in the same thing with the 11% hit rate. So I guess I would say that, his price is probably acceptable, depending on where he's going and everything, being that he's in the same tier and, the same hit rate as those other guys, that he's probably going a lot later, or at least he was at one point. I don't know if he still is. But somebody that, or two guys that stand out in Fresh Breath a little bit better than those guys, just a little bit, not much, but I don't really hear much about them, but they are both going to high-end schools, which is probably why they're standing out in Fresh Breath, and it's Ethan Grunkenmeyer and Ryan Puglisi, going to Georgia, or I'm sorry, going to Penn State and Georgia respectively. I really haven't heard too much about them. Maybe it's because they're terrible. Maybe, I don't know. So do you have anything to tell me about those two players?
Yeah, specific to those two, I'm out on Grunkmeyer, just not really into what Penn State's doing right now. And historically at the quarterback position, I think as poor as Aller has looked, he's still going to be the starter there. And Grunkmeyer is a guy who, I mean, there are things to like, so I'm not discounting that. But at the end of the day, just not really sure that he's going to be a difference maker at the end of the day. But I do like the Puglisi call there at Georgia. So he is a guy who is maybe never the biggest producer stats wise out there, at least from everything that I have seen listed. But I mean, his arm is really good. He's a great baseball player and showcases that arm, and definitely enough mobility to be very functional as a runner. He's not afraid to scramble. He can spin out of tackles. He can do those things. It's just a matter of, do you really want to rank a guy at Georgia? He has the size too, I think, is another plus. He's like 6'3", 210 was what he was listed as a recruit, at least. And those things are all intriguing, but we know how Georgia is. You got to wait your turn. So now we're going to be waiting for, after this year, after Beck's gone, we're going to be waiting for Stockton or somebody of that like, and maybe Puglisi will. Maybe that's a benefit, right? Maybe that's a plus, is that Georgia has been able to respect that these guys are sticking it out there, they're going to give him the opportunity to start after a while. But do I really want to wait 3-4 years for Puglisi, or do I want to use that pick elsewhere is the question. He's cheap enough in drafts where I actually don't mind that as a later guy in like a supplemental draft. I will say that I am higher on Walker White going to Auburn. I just think that at the end of the day, a guy with those tools, the NFL is going to be very intrigued by the size, speed combination, his high level arm. I mean, that's like some Josh Allen combination of rushing threat and arm strength. And I'm saying, in a very raw prospect, he's not going to end up being a Josh Allen. I mean, it's like those guys are so rare, but he's that type of a player where you get excited about those tools. And I think the NFL will as well. So he needs to hone in on the accuracy part. Absolutely. But he's impressed as an All-American Bowl participant. He's pressed, skills wise, just along throughout his high school career to be a pretty high-end recruit. And Walker White is part of something pretty special at Auburn going on. We're going to talk about the wide receivers here in a minute. And there's a lot of talent going there to Auburn, not only the top couple of recruits, but there's other guys that we could even point to as far as future recruits or lower end recruits in the recruiting class that stick out a little bit as well. So it just seems like they're now kind of recommitting towards this hopefully better offense going forward. So not quite the Auburn we've been seeing the last few years, hopefully in the future. And I guess not to continue on the tangent, but Demond Williams too. I mean, I like him. He's going to Washington. He's following Jedd Fisch, who has success. Fisch was at Arizona. We like Fafita as an undersized guy. We like what he did there in that system. And I think Demond Williams, you get that. Plus, you get just such a great rushing ceiling. So at the end of the day, I mean, his NFL shot at 5'10", maybe more, but we don't really know. That's a short quarterback, that's for sure. But his rushing plus really, really solid passing, honestly. He's not like this Jalen Milroe guy, really raw coming in with poor passing production. Like, he's actually a pretty efficient passer, Demond Williams, that is. And so I was impressed by 76% completion percentage there. I mean, 34-3 touchdown interception ratio, well over 1,100 yards rushing for 20 rushing touchdowns his senior year. I mean, those are prolific numbers and efficient. Yeah, there's just a lot to like there. And I do like the system going into Washington. So maybe it'll be a bit of a rebuild, but I think they'll be able to do some nice things there in the future. And I don't really like Croman Hook. I know you mentioned him going to Florida State as just a name to throw out there. Just never necessarily been my flavor, but there are guys that are pretty high on him. He seems to be kind of a divisive prospect and recruit.
Yeah, like I said, I think I like Demond Williams' price the best out of all those guys. Although I got Puglisi. I just looked in our recent startup. I got Puglisi in the 32nd round. You're okay with that price? I mean, obviously, like you said, it's probably going to be a couple of years at the very least, and God only knows if he'll get recruited over, have to transfer out, or whatever. But I don't know. Like I said, a small chance hit rate at a big school, one of the biggest schools. I'll take him in the 32nd round.
Yeah, I don't mind that at all. And I think one other guy that we should for sure mention would just be CJ Carr, Notre Dame quarterback, just a guy who's been impressing early on. He's a high-end 4-star recruit. Some services were actually very, very high on him as like a top 5 type of guy. And he might not be the most impressive guy from a statistical standpoint. But man, he just is a very solid player, underratedly athletic, plenty mobile and elusive as a rusher, and also just as a passer in the pocket, outside the pocket. I think he's going to do some nice things at Notre Dame. He's another case of, do you trust Notre Dame to develop and put out quarterback talent? I just said how I didn't really like Penn State to do so. Are we trusting Notre Dame to do that? We'll kind of see how things play out there. But ultimately, I know you and we like maybe one or two of the guys at Notre Dame from the receiving core, weapon-wise. Maybe there is some juice there in the future.
Yeah, actually, Carr was really the only other one. I guess Jaden Davis at Michigan is kind of in that same mix. We're not overly excited about Michigan and Michigan offenses and all that kind of stuff, but definitely a name to be mentioned. And he was one of the higher, at least a mid-tier recruit or whatever you want to call him. So a name that should be mentioned. That's probably enough though, because I don't think we'll ever hear from any of these other guys on the list. So we probably will only hear from probably about 2 or 3 of these guys as it is. Why don't we get into the running backs? We'll save the wide receivers for last, save the best for last, because I think we have quite a few wide receivers that we're excited about. Not as many running backs, although, I mean, I like some. I know, like, once again, the C2C boys seem to just hate this running back class, and after like the top 2, they seem to just be like, nope, I'm done, and they want nothing to do with it. I'd say I'm closer to 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that I'm pretty happy with, and and I think I took a couple. I think you might have taken a couple in our recent supplemental. I know Drew, who was in the chat at least earlier, he took a couple because I think he stole Keedron Young from me, if I remember correctly, and I was not very happy about that. I know somebody did. I don't remember. I know for a fact that Drew stole Jordan Marshall from me. And, I'm kind of bearing the lead here with some of these guys, but I'm just remembering how many times I got sniped again. And I'm like, but, so I actually have 2 players technically in tier 1, with a small difference between them. But I mean, really, you could say there's 2 top tier players here in this class, as far as I'm concerned. Do you have 1, 2, or how many players do you have in the top tier, or do you have anyone in the top tier, the way that you rank them out?
So I do have some tier 1 guys. I have 2 guys. It's just a small tier break after them, though, to be honest. There is not necessarily as much differentiating guys in this class compared to past years. Travion Henderson in a tier of his own. A few years back, you got Bijan, and I guess Zach Evans at that time was potentially up there if you were scared off from the off the field stuff. I guess was another discussion. But there's sometimes all these really top end guys that are clear bona fide number 1s in a class, and this year that's just not the case. So there's a lot of depth, and I'm tempted to expand that tier 1 out to 4, 5, 6 guys, maybe even. But I will say that there are 2 guys that end up kind of catching my eye as the top 2 that I would take in supplementals. And that's the thing. Sometimes when you make these ranks, you'll say, they're all in the same tier. And then you get into a draft and you say, no, they're not. There's only, maybe 2 of them that I would feel comfortable taking in this range. The rest of them, I got to wait on. So in this class, I'll give them away here. Taylor Tatum, Oklahoma running back, and Quentin Martin, Penn State running back. Do you have those as your top 2 guys, John?
That's it. The running backs are a little different, but not much. Like I said, the way that Fresh Bet does it, the recruit rank doesn't matter nearly as much for the running backs, because I mean, technically, Quentin Martin is not nearly the recruit as far as the composites are concerned as Taylor Tatum. But yet, they end up being extremely similar in score, because you have both of them going to high-end programs with Oklahoma and Penn State, as far as like teams that have put out running backs into the NFL. They both have high-end height and weight and everything. And then, and like I said, I really don't grade them all that differently as far as their actual composite grade, because they're running backs. So they end up having a pretty similar grade there. And if anything, you could even say that, like, even though obviously Quentin Martin's kind of buried this year, like after that, he's almost guaranteed the show. He's guaranteed the rock. Going forward, where maybe you can't 100% guarantee that for Tatum, but I just feel like he'll win out when it's all said and done. So I'm not overly concerned about either one. But yeah, so they're definitely my tier 1. I agree with you. The tier 2, that tier break isn't that much between Tatum, Martin, and then the next couple of guys. But the one nice thing with the running backs is just the weights, like the heights and the weights, because it makes it so easy, as long as I have accurate numbers, which I'm constantly trying to update it and everything, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. But as long as I have updated numbers or accurate numbers, these guys that are 175, 180, it's pretty easy to knock them down. But, the guys that are 195, 200, 205, and so on and so forth, that it's nice to see those guys, coming in as true freshmen. They're going to be well over 200 pounds, 210 pounds, and so on when it's all said and done. And so it's just nothing you have to truly worry about for the future.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think you said it pretty well. I will, I guess, embellish a little bit with these players just as far as what they do well, because people are probably interested. Well, these are the top end guys. Like, what do you even like the most about them? And I just think that Taylor Tatum's complete nature as a running back, enough speed for 4 to 4.5 type of guy is what I would guess as far as that speed goes. His receiving ability sticks out as just very solid and dependable. He runs with enough power, contact balance, and enough burst. He can add a little finesse to his game, and I think he just has such a smooth all-around game that he projects well to be that lead back. Probably next year. We don't know for sure at Oklahoma, but that's how it's looking right now. He just might have a slower start, as I've expressed in prior podcast episodes, just because he's a late enrollee. He's been, mostly focusing on baseball at this point. He might be a little bit smaller than we thought. Like, he's listed at 205. I don't know if he's actually that, or if that's just kind of their stock weight that they've just been holding on to. So, but Taylor Tatum has a lot going for him. Like you said, most services have him top 2 or at number 1. And then Quentin Martin at Penn State, we know that right now he's listed a little bit smaller in the 190s, but that should not be a concern because of the landing spot. Penn State is just they're insane with the way that they get these athletes just bulked up and then also just more and more athletic. It's just insane. So I think that you combine his future progression that we should anticipate from an athletic standpoint and a weight standpoint, plus his receiving abilities. And he ran a 21.5 mile per hour time on the field. I mean, that's great. He combines great elusiveness with great receiving game. I mean, that's kind of hard to beat. I know he's maybe not as physical as some would like, but put on an extra 15 pounds, and I think he's going to be plenty physical at, 210. So I guess I'm not concerned about Quentin Martin. I think he has probably the highest upside with this class. When you put together, he could be a complete 3-down back who's just very, very good in the receiving game. You don't see many players like that coming out of college who can just put it all together like that. I think that at the end of the day, there's a little bit of projection going on there. I know some folks have said he's not even a running back. He's more of like a wide receiver. And I think that's just going too far. Like, he is much better as a running back than he is as a wide receiver. It's just the fact that he's so good at playing out at a wide receiver position. It makes folks a little bit nervous, but I don't think his future is there at all. I really do think it's more at the running back position.
Yeah, and with that height and everything, you would assume that he should be able to be well over 200 pounds and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not worried about Martin. He's my clear-cut RB2 in the class. But like you said, the RB3 and RB4 for me are not that far behind in a tier of their own. And I don't actually have the hit rates on this page for some reason, but in a pretty good hit rate as far as their tier, if I do remember correctly. But once again, it's one player in Cam Davis that was more of a high-end recruit or higher-end recruit, and then a lower-end guy in David Eziamume that's also showing up. But they're going to FSU, they're going to Clemson. These higher-end programs that have put out solid running backs in the past, even in the recent past, and also have great size. We have Eziamume at 6'1", 210 pounds, and Cam Davis at 5'10", 224. So, like solid size there. And I can't find much to dislike about him. And if you really think about it, I know, you were saying, I think it was on the last pod, how you expect Roydell Williams is gonna, carry the rock for Florida State and be that lead guy and everything. I really don't think it'll be that crazy for Cam Davis to take over at some point in the near future, because I mean, like I said, I think he's, I don't want to say a stud necessarily, but I definitely think he's a high-end recruit.
Yeah, I mean, Cam Davis could certainly take over, and I don't think it's, I don't think it's insane at all to say that could happen this season. But we just know how volatile the running back position is. It doesn't even necessarily mean that Roydell has to be bad or has to be benched or this or that. Just for us to see this freshman really pop off and give him some run. So I think Cam Davis at the end of the day should get some playing time. He's very much ready. I mean, with 224 pounds, that's the updated weight, and that makes me really excited for a guy who is generally ranked as a higher end 4-star. And the guys at the official who do all the early recruiting of these guys, they do a great job at C2C, just kind of scouting these guys early in the process. They had him as the RB1 in the class like all along. Now I think that has faded, right? We've got more information and landing spots and this and that, but he's done really nothing to necessarily make us sour, other than folks kind of realizing, well, he is this exciting size speed type of guy, but he also is kind of just this raw runner. Like he was a quarterback in high school. And so that's going to make folks concerned. Can he actually function as a running back? But I saw the raw skills being there, enough ability, physicality wise, burst wise, elusiveness wise, to become a running back. I think he's going to be just fine there at FSU. They've been putting out some fun running back production there recently. And ultimately, Cam Davis, has a lot of the things that you want. Maybe not the most well-rounded profile to this point, but that doesn't mean he can't catch the ball. Just means he hasn't done it thus far as a quarterback, LOL, in high school. So of course he's not catching passes from himself. Though he probably could. I mean, if you look at this guy, I mean, I wouldn't be trying to tackle him. That is for sure. But the other guy you listed there was David Eziamume, and I was not familiar with your rank of him, because I actually got him pretty late in our latest startup draft, and I think I got him maybe as like the RB6 or so in this, maybe later in the class if we're just going amongst the freshmen. But yeah, Eziamume is a guy that I like, obviously enough to take him pretty highly, and I know some recruiting services, if you just look at that 4-star to even high 3-star rating, you'll be like, ooh, what's going on there? But some recruiting services were very high on him, and the track times and the size and the landing spot, all those things should be very promising as a recruit. I think there's some opportunity there at Clemson, and they don't dip into the transfer pool. So he should have opportunity, if it's not this year, next year. They're not bringing in all these recruits to compete. That's just not something that they do. So right now at Clemson, he's the next guy up, and I like his physicality and pop to pair with that size, speed, versatility. So I mean, comp wise, kind of hard to come up with one clear one. I think Charbonnet was one that I saw early in the process. I would have to go back and recheck to make sure that I still like that comp enough, but still, that's a pretty exciting opportunity ahead of David Eziamume at Clemson.
Yeah, I was looking back. You got him in the 11th round of our draft, and I was trying to see when I got oh goodness, I got Tatum in the 7th. So yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good drop there. 4 rounds, 5 rounds from that time to it's a pretty good drop. But yeah, I like the price there. I guess it didn't really work with what I was doing, but yeah, Freshbeth was a fan once I had it dialed in, because when I first started with Freshbeth, it was more based on like the wide receiver and quarterbacks, and so the composite grade was just killing him, because he's a .903, he's a 3-star back, and it was just absolutely killing him. And then once I realized that really the composite doesn't nearly matter as much as for running backs, then I adjusted that, and he skyrocketed. And like you said, I think the biggest thing for him, and I guess it could kind of be like a double-edged sword, but people are falling in love with him because they don't think that he's going to get transferred over and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But at the same time, like, if he's not good, like it's not going to help anything. So I don't know. I think people are almost caring about it too much, that he's not going to get transferred over or recruited over and all that, and maybe not as concerned about who he is as a player. But, we have to assume Clemson's been pretty good about pumping him out and putting players in the NFL. And so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there. He is my RB4 RB4 in the class. But my RB5 is actually one of my favorite players. He was actually a little higher for me earlier on in the process. He dropped a little bit, but I love my big boys, and I love my big boys that go to Notre Dame, and I'm still all over Keidron Young as my RB5 in the class. And I definitely think that would be a shock for some, because it seems like a lot of people, if not most people, just do not like Keidron Young. But it's kind of the same thing. We've seen Notre Dame obviously put a lot of players into the NFL, especially even recently, maybe not first round talents or anything like that as far as the running backs, but we have actual NFL players that we care about, and that are scoring points for our fantasy teams. And we see today Audric Estime running over defenders and showing a bunch of burst in training camp. And so another player that we can be excited about. Well, here we go. Another 6 foot, 229 updated pounds of muscle for Keidron Young. And I think it's more so me, but I think you're coming along there where we're not as in love with Jeremiah Love anymore. And so, we do like Jadarian Price, but I think there can be a 1-2 punch kind of deal with Price and Keidron there, especially as a true freshman, but enough to where you can see what he can do. And then obviously Price can go off to the NFL, and then bam, it's the Keidron Young show. So I know people have concerned about his high school stats. So, what happened. I can tell you, because of those concerns, I actually watched some film on the player. It was probably the second time I've ever watched film in my entire life. And I see no concerns. Like, the dude has every bit of burst and big playability that you could ever possibly want. In fact, the majority of his plays, and I wasn't watching highlights, I was watching every play, but the majority of the plays that I watched were like 90-yard touchdowns and things like that. So it's like, I don't know where the concerns for the big playability came from beyond some people were talking about, like, I think yards per carry or something like that is senior season. And I'm like, well, I think I saw plenty in the film and in the numbers and in the recruit score and all that kind of good stuff that I'm a Keidron Young fan.
Yeah, no, I like it. And sometimes the statistics, the metrics are just telling a different story, and that's where it's important to have that kind of well-rounded analysis, or at least get a second opinion, right? That's the thing, is when something seems really off, you're like, why is this guy such a high-end recruit? And why are some people still excited about him? Like, he was inefficient as a rusher, and it's like, you look at the film and you say, wow, there must have been something going on with that offensive line and that system. A little bit of context behind it, but I don't know much about that high school. It's part of my process to knock him just a little bit with that, but at the end of the day, very, very promising at that size, and the speed that he possesses on film was pretty notable. I mean, I would say he probably is running in that 4.5 range. Maybe he's gonna be like more like a 5.4.6, like an Estimate, but still, I think Estimate is a fair comp. Absolutely, it's natural that anybody would go that route because it's Notre Dame. I think Braylon Allen, in some ways, is also kind of fair. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm still pretty high on him. I mean, I have him in my top 7. Who has recently become a big fan of his is Brandon Lejeune at Back to Devy, RB2 in the class for Brandon. So he has now become one of the biggest fans of Keidron Young. Yes. So that's a film-based approach.
It's just funny because with time, like I said, when we first started talking about him, I remember you expressed some concerns with his yards per carry in his senior year, and it wasn't just coming from you. There were plenty of other people that were expressing concerns. And a lot of the bigger name people as far as analysts are concerned in the industry were just completely hating on him. And so now you start to see more and more. So I wonder if people realize, like I said, I'm not a film grinder. I don't watch film, but I did watch his film, and it seemed, and I'm not comping the players at all. I'm just saying it seemed like Barry Sanders-esque, where, you get -2 yards, -3 yards, 80 yards, -3 yards, -1 yard or whatever. And then you get 70 yards. And it seemed a lot like that. which just shows me that he has big playability, he has that speed, like you're talking about the burst. So
Oh,
I really wasn't
that
concerned
is
about him.
right. I mean, that is something that you want to see, that big playability. And I mean, that's also high school football. So if
Oh,
you're going to
well,
get into
yeah.
film watching here, you're going to see a lot of that out of these guys, these five
Well, but
stars or four
yeah,
stars
but I mean,
dominating
but
everybody.
looking at a guy that's 230 pounds doing it though, that's what I was really more excited about, because when you say, oh, this guy has yards per carry concerns and things like that, and he's 229 pounds, you go, oh, maybe he's not athletic enough. But then when you see that guy breaking 80-yard touchdowns, you go, okay, I'm no longer concerned about that anymore.
Right. That's where like the Braylon Allen comp kind of comes in, because
Sure.
Braylon Allen, I mean, we know we didn't maybe get to see him peak testing wise or anything like that, I guess, but ultimately a guy who can rip off some big plays, but at the NFL level, probably not going to be that home run hitter all the time. That's fine, right? We can still get a lot of fantasy value out of it. I am curious who you're going to have up next here. There's a guy you have not listed yet, who I do have ahead of Eziamume and Keedron Young.
Ooh.
So
Okay.
there is another
So
guy, but maybe you have him up
I
next. I don't
think
know.
I think I know who you have next, and I don't. If it's the player I'm thinking of, it's not my next player, but he is the second player after him. So the next player for me is Jordan Marshall at Michigan. I don't know if that's who you were thinking of, or if you have another player. Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. But yeah, Jordan Marshall. Obviously, we've seen some great running backs going through Michigan, especially recently. And there are concerns, and legitimate concerns, about Donovan Edwards. Is he the running back that we truly thought he is? I think, and I hope that he can get back to what he was. But obviously, there's vision concerns, there's health concerns, there's a lot of concerns with him. So we cannot guarantee that Donovan Edwards is going to be a true stud, a workhorse back, touching the ball 300 times this year. So that means that Marshall could get on the field early and often. So that's a possibility. Even if he can't get on the field this year, we're expecting that Donovan Edwards would probably go to the NFL next year, and then obviously it could very well be the Jordan Marshall show after that. He has legit size, and he's going to a legit program, blue blood school, wants to run the ball. I don't think there's too much to dislike about Jordan Marshall here, and so a pretty high end recruit, 0.96, 4-star recruit. Nothing wrong with that. So I think when you add everything up, that's why he's right here. What do you think of Marshall? They're going to Michigan, and like I said, I got sniped by, I'm pretty sure it was Drew in our draft, and I really thought that I was going to get him, and I was planning on drafting him that round, and it was like 2 picks before me, and I was just like, come on, man.
Yeah, no, I do like Jordan Marshall. He's in my top 10 guys here, and certainly a guy that he lands in the right spot. He has a lot of things going for him as a solid recruit. He's as high as the RB2 in one of the recruiting services rankings. So, I mean, that there's some guys who really, really liked him analysis wise. I just, I didn't really love the burst and speed. I think that, and the stiffness too, was a little bit of a concern on film, but it's not like the guy is just rigid as a board. Like, I mean, he has enough where I think he can get there. I comped him to maybe a Joe Mixon type of guy ultimately, who I think, if we would be very happy if Jordan Marshall gets through college, plays a nice role there at Michigan, and then becomes like a Joe Mixon, a starter for fantasy teams for half decade. That would be an awesome outcome, but I'm not saying that that's for sure going to be his route. And it's not a perfect comp. That's one that I, came up with a long time ago. So as you refresh and you watch these guys again, that can always evolve. But at the end of the day, there are some favorable things that you see with his film, and then the situation itself is pretty awesome. I don't really believe in those depth guys, the Cole Cabanas and what's his name, Hall, and these other guys at Michigan. It's like after Donovan Edwards, and we know Donovan Edwards probably is not going to be like 100% type of carry type of guy. He might be in a committee. I mean, he always kind of has been. So Jordan Marshall could get some early opportunities there as a true freshman. That's pretty exciting. He has a ready for college body, we'll say. Like he's strong enough where I think he could handle some touches. Did you reveal the guy that is after Jordan Marshall yet, John?
No, and I'm wondering if if we're going to be talking about the same guy here, but I was thinking you were talking about James Peoples out of Ohio State, but you were not. Okay, so now I'm interested. Actually, I think I might know who you are talking about now. But do you want to talk about Peoples, or you want to talk about who you were wanting to talk about?
I think it's been long enough. We got to reveal the fifth running back in the class, the RB5.
All right, who is it?
The RB1 in the class for some. Friends of
Ooh.
the show, maybe. We'll have to get into that. But Caden Durham, LSU running back. And I think the concern here is just the size for everybody and for recruiting services partially as well. But as far as being a top end recruit, I mean, he's pretty high up there, right? RB6 for Rivals, RB8 for On3. Don't remember his 247 rating off the top of my head, but one of the fastest backs in the class, like well over 21 miles per hour. Caden Durham has great track speed. I mean, like 10-2 100-meter track speed. That is amazing. Like you think of Devin A. Chain. This guy is kind of like him in some ways. I don't know if that track time is better than him. I'm assuming it's not because this guy's in high school, but he just reminds me a lot of ways of him, and his production matches up. He hits everything that you want to from an efficiency standpoint, over 10 yards per carry. He has some receiving involvement, very, very robust 21 yards per reception on 13 receptions. He has the landing spot at a SEC school where, I mean, I think that he possesses all that breakaway ability. Plus, he has enough contact balance, enough power, wiggle, those types of patience, those types of things when he needs to. It's just he was running away from everybody in his high school film. It was like Trevion Henderson in high school, where it's just like you didn't know if this guy could handle contact or if he was elusive because they were just so dominant against their competition. Nobody could tackle him in Texas. And so that's pretty impressive knowing competition within Texas typically. So I think at the end of the day, yeah, the question is, how big is he going to get? Is he 5'9", 195 right now? Is he shorter? Or he's probably not much taller. If anything, 5'10", 195 is kind of what we're looking at. He just came off of running track in the spring, so he's going to come in as a summer enrollee, and he's probably not going to be at his biggest because he's gearing, or he's trying to now bulk up. He's getting a late start on that because of the track season. So, I mean, there are some concerns as far as how much are we going to see out of him right away. But at LSU, it's a barren backfield after Caleb Jackson. There's just nobody else that's really that proven there with Caden Durham skill set. So Trey Hawley, he's, I think, out of the picture now with some of the off the field stuff going on there. That was the only other smaller back who could be like a good change of pace guy this coming year. So Durham has a chance to get on the field just because of that pure speed and athleticism. He doesn't even need to be a feature back to be an impact player, as we see in the NFL now. There are some guys who are just so athletic they can make it work and don't have to be 205, 210, anything like that.
Yeah, and we've both been pretty big fans of Durham for a while now. The only thing that gets me, I love Caleb Jackson. Beth loves Caleb Jackson, and so it's just so difficult for me to think that Durham's just going to be this workhorse stud, especially when you factor in the size and everything as well. That I get it, like the upside, the speed, the athleticism, they're all great. I just don't know if he's going to touch the field in year one. And I know a lot of people don't care about that, especially for running backs. I tend to care more than others. Just, I want to see them at least touch the field a little bit, just like it shows me that they're that damn good. The coaches can't keep them off the field. And so I get that it might not be as important, but it's just something that I want to see. And I hope he does. I mean, like I said, as much as I like Caleb Jackson, I really do hope he does. That being said, I have Durham in a tier of. There's actually 4 players here, and they're all in the same tier, all in the same hit rate, and all that kind of stuff as well. So, and that was including Peoples and Durham there, and then there's 2 other players as well that we can get into here. I don't know if you feel the same way about Kwan Lacey and Peyton Lewis. I believe that you may have drafted Lewis in our supplemental, and I want to say it was the same round that I was considering him in, or at the very least, I had. If it wasn't the same round that I was thinking about, like he was definitely in my queue, and I was trying to figure out where do I need to draft this guy, because he did unfortunately have some shoulder surgery, I believe it was, and so that's kind of keeping him off the field, or at least during the spring. So that's not the greatest, but a pretty good recruit. A low end 4-star, high end 3-star. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but he's got good size. Lewis does at 6'1", 200 pounds. That might actually be. I don't believe I've actually updated that because of the surgery and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if it's been updated or not. But how do you feel about? Obviously, I know you like Lewis because you drafted him. But how do you feel about Lewis? And then how do you feel about Kawan Lacey going to Mizzou?
Yeah, I do like both those guys. I don't quite have them in quite that same game-breaking type of category as Keenan Durham. But in this class, there's honestly not a lot separating tiers. So I said there's not a lot between tier 1 and tier 2. And when I break down tier 2 to going down to like a tier 3 with Peyton Lewis and James Peoples and Kawan Lacey, I just don't see a lot separating them. So I have no qualms with somebody saying, let's move them up. Let's, flip these guys around. Sure, I'm on board with it. And that's why I think later in the drafts, sometimes with these guys like Peyton Lewis, they keep falling down the board. You got to pounce, got to draft them. I guess when you see the time is right, if you see that freshman tier maybe drying up a little bit, that's why I went with him, even though I already had plenty of freshman running backs that I had drafted. So Peyton Lewis is just an exciting guy. I mean, RB4 for On3. He was recruited by all the top schools like Bama, Miami, Penn State, Florida, etc. He's, for some analysts, Jason DiRenzo, he has him like top 3. And I guess I'll go back to Caden Durham. CFF guys, Josh Chevalier, he had Caden Durham as the RB1 in the class. That's how high he is on Caden Durham, and we love Josh. I mean, Josh he's come on the show. He's a very knowledgeable guy, so that makes me excited for sure. But going back to Peyton Lewis, very, very smart guy, and Jason also likes Peyton Lewis, and he's going into Tennessee where we know that there is some opportunity there. Like, we love Dylan Sampson, but Dylan Sampson is not quite the biggest guy out there. He could still seed some carries with that system that likes to split up some running back carries to a guy like Peyton Lewis. We know that, if we're going back to Cam Seldon from last year's class, well, he's injured now, and we just didn't see it freshman season. I don't think that we expect him to just take over. But I guess anything's possible, but Peyton Lewis is a guy we need to pay attention to as a 2-time 55-meter state champion, almost 22 miles per hour. That is clocked. Is that faster than Caden Durham? I mean, maybe on the field, this guy might be similar, which is crazy when you think Peyton Lewis probably like close to 200 pounds out there. So very exciting. The power, the slippery nature of him, the cutting, the burst, it's all there. So I really like him. I think pre-injury Blake Corum is actually a very fair comp for Peyton Lewis. I like that, though Peyton Lewis is taller, right? We're not dealing with some of the size constraints of a shorter guy like Corum. So I think that there's a high ceiling for Peyton Lewis at Tennessee. And then you also mentioned Kewan Lacey and James Peoples as well as guys, and I like them. Lacey does show that good on the field speed and solid senior year production. He has that going his way. I don't know how it's going to look at Missouri, but they seem to put out some pretty good rushers, and it's in the SEC and all that. And then James Peoples, I don't know what's going to go on at Ohio State, but it seems as though after Travion's gone, after Quinshon Judkins is gone, James Peoples has that opportunity to be that next guy up there. He's solid in a lot of ways. I just don't really think he's that special in most ways is my issues with James Peoples. But solid enough back for sure.
So I actually just went to LSU's website just to make sure that I had the right weight for Caden Durham, and they have him listed as 5'9", 205. So if that is his updated weight, I just updated his weight in FreshBeth, and he moved up into the tier with Eziamame and Cam Davis. He is now he is now essentially tied for third, although he is listed as the RB5 in the class now for Freshbeth, but he is technically tied for third.
Dang, and I don't believe that weight at all, but it's great in the model for now, right? I love it.
Hey, I mean, I try to stick to, like I go to these websites and I put in what the school's telling me. That's
Right,
all I
you
can
have
really
to.
do, right?
Right, you have to. That's one of those weights where I'm trying to remember who the most recent example of this was, but the team puts it out there and then they go to the combine. They're like, "Wait, what happened to this guy? Like, why is he like 10 pounds lighter than what he's listed?" But that is a starting weight. I think that's gonna definitely buoy or just inflate his value for years to come. We'll say, well, he was 205 at one point in college. We love that. So there we go. Kadam Durham. It's got some C2C value, some Devy value insulation now. So congrats to those who nabbed him in their drafts.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that Kewan Lacey is listed as 205s as well. So it's like, you have them basically the same player. And then I don't have an updated weight for Peyton Lewis, so I still have him as 200 pounds. He very well could be more than that at this point, but who knows at that point. I think this is where there's probably a pretty clear tier break for me, at least. I don't know about you. It just seems like it's a lot of guys that are, you're looking more at like pedigree and, backup players. We're not expecting these players to necessarily touch the field this year, next year, maybe even in 3 years, or maybe it'll be 3 years before we like truly see some of these guys. But I don't know if you have a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you were about to ask me anyways, but I gotta let the people know. I mean, I think Jaden Baugh at Florida is definitely going to see some touches this year. We just know that Montrell he's not it. Like, he's reliable enough. I know the coaching staff likes him and everything, and there's probably some Gator fans who would say like he's an elite back, but I mean, he was not as good as Trevor Etienne, and now Etienne's gone. Jaden Baugh's been doing nothing but impressing, and he impressed me early on in the process. When I was looking through the film, I was like, who is this guy? Like, how is he a 3-star? And it just made no sense. And he's risen up. Like, he's a solid enough 4-star in some recruiting services. But as an early enrollee, he's just bulked up and continued to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I loved he has experience playing wide receiver. Okay. He has the receiving skills where he can be deployed all over the field at 237 pounds, working as a workhorse type of back, hopefully in the SEC. That's very intriguing if he can get that opportunity in the future. He was very explosive and efficient, both as a rusher and a receiving back in high school too. I think his senior film is really what you want to watch if you want to evaluate him as he plays more running back and even some wide receiver on that tape. But I will warn people, I guess, that those that film is when he was like 200 pounds. The guy has gained like 30 some pounds over the last year. I am concerned about his top end speed now. I think ultimately he should settle in the 225, 230 range, if I'm just being honest with what I would like to see, because then he can keep that fluidity and burst and still maintain some of that ability he has laterally and strength and power wise. He's the total package, assuming that he's not too big. And I'm very excited about Jaden Baugh, as you can probably tell. Somebody who I just did not expect him to be rising up people's ranks as well. But obviously the spring game, when a guy pops and is looking really, really good, looking like a man amongst boys out there as a true freshman, that should get our attention for sure. So that is one guy. I have a couple more that I want to mention here for sure as some potential difference makers. Maybe not this year, but in future years. But do you have any quick thoughts on Baugh? Are you going to pour some water on my fire here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he wasn't in my original, because I went through. I want to say I had here. I can count it real quick. I had 41 running backs in Freshbeth for the 2024 class originally. Jaden Baugh was not one of them because he was that low. He was not in the top 41 running backs in the composite ranks.
Right. He was an athlete, right?
And so I think that's why, because he was listed as an athlete and not as a running back. And so, I ended up going in and adding him later on because of guys like you and some other people that are very high on him. I want to say Felix Sharp's really high on him as well, and probably, quite a few other C2C boys as well. So I ended up, adding him in, and once again, the composite score doesn't mean that much, but he's definitely a 3-star, composite. He is not even in the nines. He's at 0.893. Yes, he has that. He has that great size, but I don't know if he has the athleticism that we're looking for. And I'm pretty high on Trayon Webb, so I don't want to. I don't think that he's necessarily. And we know that Florida loves Montreal Johnson. We also know that Montreal Johnson's not the truth and not the guy, but I don't think he's losing his job this year. Was a senior, 5th-year player, whatever he is. I think he's going to get the ball this year. I think Trayon Webb's going to be the second guy, and then we're looking at Jaden Baugh as like the third guy at best. He might even be behind another guy or two. So I don't know. I don't truly believe that all of a sudden he's just going to be this workhorse back stud or anything like that. Obviously, he has the size to do it. But unless somebody transfers out or whatever, and then if we're all expecting Napier to be gone, then are they bringing someone in? Are they recruiting over him? Are they doing all that? And so that's why this is more narrative based than anything else. But I just, in the back of my mind, I just really have a hard time believing in Jaden Baugh. That, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean that that I'm right or that he shouldn't be drafted earlier than what we were talking about. Because obviously everything else hits. The size hits, the pedigree, the school hits, like all that kind of stuff. So he shows up fairly well in Fresh Bath. I just personally have a hard time really believing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get that, because you have to, at the end of the day, buy into the opportunity being there. But we do talk a lot about the talent winning out. And as much as we both like Trayon Webb, I think in a lot of ways, he projects as that like feature back type of guy more than Webb does. So Webb is pretty explosive. I think we both like that. We like that more than what Montreal brings to the table. So we could be looking at a split there. I think it's good to mention Webb ultimately. So definitely a good call out there. And maybe Bob will move up more in the model if you use, I don't know if you use composite ranks or if that's the input that you put in there, but for the On3 industry, so kind of averaging all the industry rankings and whatnot, I think he's 25. So top 25 back in the class with that. So maybe it'll make a difference. Check it out. But I would say some other guys that I just have to mention here is kind of either my guys or just guys that I like a good amount. Jordan Lyle, Miami back, just very efficient. One of those guys who hits the 10 yards per carry threshold for a senior season. RB1 for On3. 4-star with, some various opinions from other recruiting services that are lower on him. But our rivals liked him as a top 5 guy. On3 loved him as the top back in the entire class. Bama wanted him. Ohio State wanted him. Georgia wanted him. He was originally expected to go to actually Ohio State, but he just ended up flipping over to Miami. And ultimately, I think that he's a 3-down back. Good speed, good receiving ability, contact balance, all of those things, elusiveness. And my comp list, I'm not going to give you my top comp, but I think that he could be like a Rashad White type of guy. That's not my top comp, but I know that sometimes going for that very C-League one is just getting ahead of ourselves. So there's always a chance that maybe he is not physical enough, not quite big enough at the college level. I think that's your concern. And we'll just have to see what he weighs in at, because I've heard anywhere between 180s. The most common is 190 from his senior season. And then 202 is the highest that I've seen him listed, which I think 202 would dramatically boost any sort of model that has him ranked. So Jordan Lyle is just kind of one of those guys for me. Or one of my guys, I guess we'll say, and he's going to Miami, which recently did bring in a pretty good guy, and Damian Martinez too. So that unfortunately does block him. I kind of hate that for Jordan Lyle, but at the end of the day, these guys, I mean, he has to play 3 years in college before he can go to the NFL level. So I think maybe in year 2 and 3, he can make that big impact.
Yeah, I was just trying to look to see if I could find an updated weight on him. I still can't find it. There's nothing really anywhere. And so, I still have him listed at, actually I just found three different websites that all say 180. And so, that's why I've had him listed at the entire time. And I've said if someone could just show me proof that he is not 180, I will put in a different weight, but I cannot find it anywhere. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm lower on Lyle because he's 180 pounds. He very well could be much more than that, but just somebody somewhere, just find me some kind of confirmed, even if it's just a tweet or something. Find me something that shows that he's more than that.
Right. I mean, I guess the most updated one on 3 is 190. So
Okay.
you can say that cancels out 247. I don't really know which one ultimately is more reliable. Obviously, one site has the guy ranked higher than the other, so maybe that's
Right.
why
That's
one is higher
probably
than
why.
right. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Exactly.
And I mean, obviously that could all clear up, but I mean, we're already getting through most of our supplementals. I guess technically we do have another supplemental. I think it's starting next week, or like later on this week, possibly. So maybe maybe I'll have to try and find an updated weight before then. But like I said, there's some guys like there's some other guys that are they're maybe more like pedigree guys that aren't going to get to really touch the field early, or we don't expect to, like a Nate Frazier, Kevin Riley, Daniel Hill, even like a Chauncey Bowens. Are you kind of feeling kind of meh about all of them, or is anyone really standing out that you would like? No, I'd actually would prefer to get this guy on my team.
I've made a grave mistake. I've forgotten Nathaniel Frazier, who I have higher than Caden Durham. But
Oh wow.
yeah, I can't believe I forgot that, because I will be honest, Caden Durham, for a lot of folks, he's lower than Nate Frazier in ranks because we see the Georgia tag, right? And we say he's the best back. We perceive him as the best back going to Georgia this season in this cycle, as a freshman. And Nate
Yeah, the only
Frazier.
problem is he's behind like 18 other running backs.
Right, right. It's just such a deep, yeah, it's such a deep roster. But at the end of the day, it's kind of similar to some other programs where they do allow these guys just to continue to wait their turn, then turn them loose. And the thing that differentiates him from some of the recent backs at Georgia is he's not going to test like a plotter. He is not going to test like the Dewan Edwards of the world, Elijah Holyfield, to go down the list, right? Nate Frazier is probably going to test like a 4.4 type of athlete. He's super fast, 21.3 miles per hour. His 100-meter track times 10.5. So the athleticism is there. The receiving ability is there, playing wide receiver in college up to his junior year. Then he started switching to the running back position. So if you go by his production in high school, you're probably not going to love it. Like his efficiency particularly dropped his senior season, but I think it was a team-wide issue with the running game. Like it was similar for all their backs. And while I think that the production is a concern, Brandon Lejeune has him as RB1 in the class. We talked about Jason DiRienzo's running back ranks. He's RB2 for Jason. So those guys, film-wise, are very, very high on him. I think the recruit ranks, I mean, he's still rated really highly there too. His size, I mean, 6', 208. Like, tell me what more you want out of a back going to Georgia, in the low 200s, 6 foot, has all the ability as a 3-down type of back. Well, actually, we don't know if he's a 3-down back because how good is he between the tackles is the question. Is he going to be more of a James Cook type of guy, which I think there's legitimate possibility that's kind of the Georgia type of back he is, or is he more than that? There's those red flags there. So what I'm going to say is that there's definite risk. This is not a great CFF play, but I'm willing to draft him fairly highly in this class as maybe like a top 5 or 6 back in this class, just with that upside there, knowing that there's legit Devy upside. That's what we want in the early rounds of the supplemental and startup drafts. So Nate Frazier, I apologize for not mentioning him earlier. He's a guy where, I mean, now with Caden Durham's updated weight, maybe I'll have to move him up ahead of Nate Frazier now, but we'll see. I'll make that decision later. But Nate Frazier for me is a top 5 guy in this class.
So this is one that I'm still kind of trying to figure out with these like pedigreed schools like Georgia, like Alabama, when you just know that they're buried. Should I do a manual adjustment, which I did with Nate Frazier? If I take away that manual adjustment, he does jump up pretty high, like not number one or anything like that, but probably top five, something around there. So, talent wise and everything, we could probably say, and, obviously going to the school, right size, like everything we're really looking for. But I mean, really, we both love Trevor Etienne. I think that, I think I'm a little higher on you than, or a little higher on Roderick Robertson than you are, but I think you're still a pretty decent fan on with him. Obviously Branson Robinson, rest in peace as far as your knee and everything. But like at one point, maybe he can get back. Probably not, but like maybe he could get back on the field. But there's other players that are there, and it's just like, man, is he ever going to see the field? We can say the same thing about like a Kevin Riley, a Daniel Hill going to Alabama. It's very similar. In fact, Kevin Riley's not that far behind as far as like the composite grade, than behind Nate Frazier. And I mean, size wise, a little different, but you're going to another pedigreed school, and you might even say that he's less buried than Frazier. And so that's really my question is just, how much do we have to, or should I adjust these players, or should I just say no? Like Nate Frazier is a talented running back, and I just want to draft him on my team. Honestly, I struggle with that. I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm still trying to figure that out. I did do a manual adjustment on both Frazier and Riley and Daniel Hill as well. And so I've done that, which puts them into this kind of like mid tier where I'm probably not going to get any of them, or whatever. But I guess if any of them do fall, I'll say, okay, I'll take that guy. But I'm not like necessarily going out of my way to draft them.
To a degree, it makes sense for sure. But then we go back to, like you said, you haven't completely figured out how you want to navigate that. The hit rates, if we go back to your research, definitely support drafting Alabama, drafting Georgia backs. There's no doubt about it. So it's just a waiting game type of thing with these backs. And the hit rate's going to be there unless, something completely changes within the next year and Alabama's school shuts down. It's nothing like that's going to happen, right? So we know that Alabama's going to be Alabama, Georgia's going to be Georgia as far as recruiting some top end talent out of those states and having a good coaching staff that should field a very relevant offense. And I think at the end of the day, I am a little bit lower on Kevin Riley, but I just don't quite see that amazing athleticism. He was rushing like 6 yards per carry to his senior year, and he didn't flash that top end speed or testing speed or anything like that really wowed me, unlike Keegan Young, who did flash some of those things on tape. So for Kevin Riley, I am more likely to say, yeah, he's buried, because I don't believe in the player either. Like if I really believed in the guy, I would probably draft him and say in 3 years at Bama, he's probably going to be the next guy up. But there's that added layer too, that now Nick Saban's gone. Maybe that's another reason to kind of doubt, taking a freshman running back right now at Alabama this year. But I would say that for Nate Frazier, I'm not as concerned about that. We want to follow some of the hit rates. We want to, be as patient as we can be. Don't draft a whole roster full of these guys who aren't going to see the field for 3 years, but every once in a while, it's definitely okay to draft that, in my opinion. So that is just one route that I like to go in drafts if I really feel strongly about landing spot and that the player has the potential to be a difference maker.
All right. Well, I did not think we were going to go this long on these freshman recruits, but hey, we've been. Hopefully, you guys have been enjoying it and have appreciated insight. I guess we'll call it insight. Definitely insight from Aaron. I'm more just talking out of my ass, but I think we'll save the wide receivers for the next pod. I'd say that maybe we'll even talk about some tight ends. I know gross, but I think we might have enough time to where we could do that as well. But obviously, there's still a lot of running back recruits. Like I said, there was 41 recruits before I even got to Jaden Baugh earlier. There's probably at least a couple more that we should probably mention as honorable mentions before we get out of here. I'm wondering, how do you feel about Jarrett Gibson going to Texas? Another player that's probably a little buried, but a decent recruit going to Texas. Pretty solid size, and obviously Texas is one of those like hot names right now as far as the schools, the program, all that kind of stuff. Moving over to the SEC doesn't quite apply, but now they are there, so they're starting to get that pedigree, and they're starting to put some pretty solid players, especially running backs, into the NFL, at least more recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that following, I guess, that same type of mindset as we were saying with Georgia, Bama. I mean, who is cranking out more top end running backs than Texas right now? Bijan, Jonathan Brooks, C.J. Baxter, Jaden Blue. That lineup there is looking really intriguing, and it is another waiting game. I don't think any of us think that Jarrett Gibson is going to beat out C.J. Baxter and Jaden Blue this year, but then after them, there's opportunity there. And he's a guy who was a top 3 running back at most services, but he fell. So now we're seeing, if you're just coming into the game later or just using the most updated recruit service rankings for these recruits, I mean, he's not going to be that high. So you'll say, it's kind of meh. There are some guys who still really like him, some analysts out there, Mike Farrell, who does a lot of college breakdowns and has his own site and everything for recruiting. I mean, he has him as RB1, I think, still in the class. Like, there are some folks who like Jarrett Gibson for sure. 4-star going to Texas, and he was highly recruited by all the top end schools. Early standout in high school. I just saw like those efficiency concerns, especially later in high school, becoming a concern when he went to the IMG Academy. But I guess at the end of the day, IMG, I mean, they're trying to produce really good talent, but their production, you just really can't go off of it. Because if you go off of production, you say, well, Carnell Tate sucked, and this guy sucked, and that guy sucked, because they share the field with these other top end recruits. And sometimes they're going up against this competition that, that's going to influence their production at the end of the day. So I'm not excusing all those concerns. I do think that his poor yards per carry is also reflected in kind of poor speed. Honestly, his track speed was subpar, but some of the things that we've said in the past we really like out of backs, like explosiveness, so vertical jumps and other jumps, they're there for Jarrett Gibson. Like we see a 41-inch vertical, so showing some burst, some explosiveness there, some good agility and acceleration. I just think that he doesn't break away from guys is the issue. So how is that long speed going to fare as a player? So I think that, maybe that top end type of guys like a J.K. Dobbins. So that's kind of stylistically some more ceiling or higher end comp that I would describe him to. But, he's not the most elite back coming into college, so we probably don't need to overspend by any means on him in supplemental drafts or otherwise. But if we're saying who's the best running back going to Texas this season, probably Jarrett Gibson, but I guess don't sleep on Christian Clark either, who was a 4-star to high 3-star type of guy going to Texas in this class, who, again, not the best producer, but I think he has enough size, speed, agility, all those things to make a difference there. So also an early enrollee, Christian Clark could also make some noise. It's like a deeper running back sleeper in this class, if you like that.
Yeah, like, I mean, I hate playing the waiting game, but it's probably a guy that you can get at a solid price, and so he's not getting as much of the hype. Definitely somebody that you can take advantage of there. A player that is getting quite a bit of hype that we haven't talked about much yet is Johan Cardenas out of Vanderbilt. And I know that they have brought in quite a few solid recruits recently, in recent years, I should say, and everything. But like, it's not like there's anything to be excited about at Vanderbilt. But yet there's a lot of people that are really excited about Cardenas, and I guess it's the size and maybe speed, athleticism combination. But you're kind of just banking on him to transfer somewhere, and then with that unknown of, does that mean up? Does that mean down? Where is he going to end up? It's just a little scary for me.
Yeah. I don't really want to touch the Vanderbilt back in drafts. It's just one of those deals where I like a lot of the things that I see from a production standpoint. He's a receiver. He's capable enough as a receiver. Seems fast enough from reported times and all that. I just don't think he's necessarily elite at all those other things. And I mean, at Vanderbilt, how is he going to stand out? He's probably going to transfer out, like you said. And, you do like to chase talent at the end of the day, but sometimes it's just maybe not worth it at this stage. If he ends up really flashing and then he transfers to a prominent school and gets a starting job, like trade for him then. Just pay up and say, I liked him from the start. I always liked him. I didn't draft him, but in a supplemental or rookie or a freshman draft, that is. But I've always liked Johan Cardenas. Now that he's a little bit more proven and he's shown that he is the recruit that I liked, just trade for him then when there's more certainty. Like just kind of take the fact that you're going to have to pay up for him. But at this point in time, I don't know that's a bet that I'm trying to make right now. Okay. So I don't know that I'm really drafting him in supplementals unless it's at the very, very end. And usually he doesn't make it that far to the very end of supplemental drafts.
Man, I changed Jordan Lyle to 190 pounds, and he's skyrocketed up the ranks, man. Just that 10-pound difference made a huge difference in fresh math. I guess I'll just be hopeful, and I'll say we'll go ahead and say he's 190 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah,
these guys are moving up. Kadam Durham, Jordan Lyle to the moon.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just like I said with the running backs. It really is just updating these weights, and trying to get accurate weights and everything. It's so difficult sometimes, but sometimes it's all the difference, especially when you're dealing with a system that is utilizing, saying, oh, these guys hit, these guys don't. A guy that's 180 pounds doesn't hit. A guy that's 190 pounds has a much higher chance of hitting, and so that's essentially what's happening here. I think we've talked long enough, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Aeneas Williams out of Notre Dame, just because my co-host from the Devy University pod, Andy Starr, is a pretty big fan. In fact, I would say that he would rather have Aeneas Williams than or Aeneas Williams, whatever his name is. He would rather have him than Kedron Young. I think that's a little crazy. But I don't think it's all that insane to take Aeneas here late and, say like, hey, like once again, we have some pedigree of running backs coming from Notre Dame recently, being, at least usable in the NFL. He has quality size. I just looked for an updated weight. He was listed as 5'10", 200 pounds. So he's right there where we want him to be. Size-wise and everything, and I guess he's gotten some hype, and that's why Andy is liking him, because he's thinking that Aeneas could actually get on the field early and often. Do you have anything to say about Williams before we get out of here?
More so that, I mean, he's just a accomplished producer, functional receiver. He seems, functionally agile, I suppose, and he's a tough enough, solid enough player with the size that you want to see in a good system. There's a lot of things going his way. It's just that, well, there's a Kedron Young standing in his way. And then also you just have the fact that, I mean, like Jeremiah Love or not, I mean, at this point, I've definitely soured on him. He's going to get some touches there in some capacity out of the backfield and as a receiving back. So that limits maybe how much Aeneas Williams could work in at that receiving role. And then I think at the end of the day, too, we like Jadarian Price. Probably just be there this year, but with how good of a running back class this is, I mean, could Price stay another year? It might be a mistake because Kedron Young or somebody could overtake him, but there is that potential for that logjam there. Aeneas Williams, he's a good cheap play. I mean, I think Rivals had him as the RB2 in the class. Like there are some recruit services and some people who are very high on him. Kind of crazy, but Aeneas is not a bad player. I think the comp that I felt most comfortable with was a slightly larger Kyron Williams, just somebody who fits that that type of role, that type of play style really well. So Notre Dame went after that back, and they said, we like some of those guys like Kyron, but we also like the bigger guys, the bigger boys, right? The Keejans, the Audric Estimes, and then they also like the Logan Diggs, right? And the Kyron Williams and those types. So they obviously, as a team, as a recruiting team, they do have maybe two separate types of guys they like to roll with, and maybe there is room for two pretty solid backs there in the future. So who knows?
Yeah, until the 229-pound rocked up guy takes over and never looks back, just like Audric Estime did, the most productive running back in the 2024 class. But so I think that is enough. We gave you guys a lot of names there, and hopefully we've caught you up on all of the running backs and quarterbacks. We still have quite a few players to talk about, which we will talk about on the next pod. We really do appreciate you guys listening for about an hour and 45 minutes. So we appreciate you sticking with us. And we will be back in a couple weeks to talk about the wide receivers and tight ends. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.